I'm going to tell a story about how a small group of people think they might be able to change a whole country. In a world obsessed with economic growth, we've lost sight and lost the ability to track the changes in patterns that mean really big things about the future in front of us. And we've got to learn to find new ways of calibrating our response to those pattern shifts and then responding appropriately to do that. Many years ago when I was a child, about a 6-year-old, I did my first public talk demonstrating life-saving skills to a beachside audience in South Pembrokeshire, the county where I live. And the idea of the talk, my dad was a doctor, was to show that if a 6-year-old could understand the basic principles of first aid and apply this idea of ABC, airway, breathing and circulation, you might be able to make a really big difference in the event of an emergency. And thousands of lives, I suspect, have been saved doing that. Roll on the years, and I find myself once again playing around with an ABC framework for change. But this one's different and it's designed to deal with a much bigger emergency. And the ABC I want to hold in your mind is about being aware, bold, and curious. Aware means being fully alert and paying attention to what's happening in the world around us, particularly around climate and biodiversity and social justice. Notice what the patterns mean. Notice what it means when we're on course for the worst projections. Notice what it means when species go extinct and so on. Being bold means setting goals that are appropriate for the scale of challenge that we've got in front of us. Recognizing that small steps have got their place, but only if they lead to the scale of change that's needed. And being curious means being comfortable, staying in the space of not knowing the answers to absolutely everything, but asking better and better questions to get to the root causes of the challenges ahead of us. So we're on a journey together to build the world's most exciting lab that we can imagine. It's going to be a lab with hundreds and thousands of people working together to solve the biggest challenges of our time. And I wanted to put in perspective my journey to joining that lab. I reflected on my childhood and how growing up on the coastline on the west coast of Wales ended up teaching me a bunch of things that I later found to be absolutely invaluable. As a young child, I had fear as a common teacher, I guess. I played on the cliffs and the coves and the bays around my childhood home, pretty free to go and experiment and play to see what kept me safe and what was dangerous. And on the way, I learnt to tread that boundary between risk and safety. And it taught me not only about risk, but taught me about connection to nature and connection to place that led directly to me starting one of my first businesses, TWF Adventure, through which we've taken 200,000 people to play in dangerous places and do so safely because we know how to prepare. Because one of the things that I found on the way was that coasteering, being a gold miner, being a lifeboat crewman, being a lifeboatman, working desert rescue and all sorts of other things, is that by far the best way to prepare for what's coming is to practice. And no matter what we practice, we're certain that what we're prepared for isn't what will happen. But the more prepared you are, the more likely you are to be able to respond with what's coming. And one thing is certain is that with the changes and patterns around us in terms of climate and nature, we know that we're not prepared. In the UK, my country, is less prepared than it was 5 years ago. So we need to be settled out in a search. We need to be in a different space of asking the questions about how do we close the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And those questions led me to connect to this organisation, this amazing organisation called North Star Transition, set up by Jyoti Banerjee and Olivia Butelis. And through them, we set up the Wales Transition Lab. And it is like no other. We believe if we're successful, we can save thousands of lives and return billions of pounds of value to the stakeholders. And that's communities and both present and future generations. And in setting up the lab, we've been asking two kinds of basic questions. Number one, and these are questions, by the way, that future generations should be asking us. Number one is to say, when you knew so much, why did you choose to do so little? And second question is, when you do act, how come it made so little difference? So you've known all these patterns, yet when we do act, it barely scratches the surface on the progress that's needed. So for us to start making progress, we teamed up with UCL's Climate Action Unit, and with them designed a series of processes to help us get under the skin of the differences between organisations, to start to map the culture and the politics and the connections between a wide range of organisations. And we were lucky to be able to bring together something like 35 leaders from different organisations, often to talk for the first times about the things that were most important to us. And as those people come on board, we tell them a story and imagine them journeying with us in the wild countryside. And in that countryside, we come across a grassy valley with a slope leading down to a cliff in the far distance. And in the valley, we see this enormous see-through sphere, transparent sphere, enormous thing. And inside it, hundreds or thousands of smaller ones. And in each of those are organisations or leaders. And they're all being turned over by the movement of the ball. And each of them can see the cliff. They can see the danger ahead, yet together they're still incapable of moving the course of the sphere. They can rock it, they can nudge it, but they cannot coordinate their effort or timing to move it. And that lack of ability to move together is the challenge that we need to overcome about getting business and government and third sector and community to work together at the same time, and to recognise the dangers for each of us that the cliff edge represents around health and well-being, around budgeting, around the well-being of future generations. And we recognise in doing this that cliff edge also represents some pretty dire consequences that are clearly in view right now. The UN represent the views of a huge number of scientists in terms of science, and they're saying that there's a 40% chance that we'll tip over the 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature rise for the first time within 5 years, way, way too soon. The IPBES Biodiversity Panel is saying that 1 in 8 species will become extinct before my grandchildren reach their 21st birthday. The UN Sustainable Development Goals have got some magnificent intent behind them. But there's a risk, according to some recent reports, that we're going to be 60 years overdue when we hit the last of them. In my own country of Wales, 3 million people, we have a £7.2 billion cost of mental health. Way, way too high. 45% of the cost of medical treatment for diabetes and heart disease are triggered by food. And lastly, only half of our rivers, and 1 in 6 in England, are in good condition. And the definition of good condition doesn't even include zero pollution. To fix this, we have to go way beyond working in small silos, working in individual organisations who never talk to each other, and step into a radically different space where we collaborate across organisations and across layers in organisations to find a different space to work together. And so within Wales Transition Lab, we've set out to do 3 broad areas of work, one of which is to optimise the food system for human health. Right now, the food system is optimised largely for business, not for humans. So we want to optimise it for human health. We want to see what's possible if you maximise prevention in health. That's stopping people get sick and properly having a health service rather than an illness treatment service. And how do we get to create space whilst doing that for nature to breathe and to thrive in a way that it hasn't been doing for the last few generations? Part of our step in that is to map the disconnects between organisations. Where are the information flows not reaching the places they count? Where are the people who would love to be talking to each other but don't even know that they exist yet? Mapping those disconnects and the consequences of them helps us to create clear space for us to work up 4 broad ambition areas. And Hiraeth is the first of these, saying how do we create this food system that will be good for both nature and soil and food for present and current generations and future as they step into our shoes? How do we create that system that brings in farmers and health professionals and conservation organisations into the same one? In terms of iechyd, how do we design our use of land and water so that wildlife in our rivers can thrive in a way that it hasn't done since the Industrial Revolution? How do we make sure that runoff from our land doesn't end up polluting our drinking water and cost money and time and effort to do that? In terms of voice, how do we bring the voice of nature and to future generations to every important decision in Wales made by government and business? What's the youngest that we could be bringing people's voice into the room? And how do you get to properly listen to the voice of a river, a meadow, or a mountain? And cliff or flow, how do we get to work out those relationships between the spaces around us in our rural or urban communities and the green prescribing and the prevention work that we can do? So right now we're working with health boards, with government, with academia, with businesses and food specialists and farmers to populate those opportunities around that space. The Japanese farmer and philosopher Manasobu Fukuoka said that the main goal of farming should be the cultivation of perfect human beings. And if he was right, we're quite a long way off course in terms of that, but I've got everything to play for. So the goal that we're working on is to step away from the world of doing less bad in better ways, step away from incremental change of the wrong thing to find out the boundaries of what's possible. What's happening in the world that we can bring back to our space in Wales, and then scale up that into country scale. And also, how do we take things that people currently imagine are completely impossible and make them suddenly feel normal, feeling we've been doing those for so long? So a couple of examples that we're taking inspiration from that I believe we can scale up at a country level. So there's an amazing supermarket in Brighton called Hisby, which stands for How It Should Be. And they're an activist supermarket, the Supermarket Rebels. They found an incredible model that allows them to put 11.5 times the benefit from shopping in their supermarket back into the community than the big box stores do. So 55 pence stays local as opposed to 5 pence. Now imagine what would happen in Wales if we took the £340 million a week being spent on groceries and put half of that back into local communities. At a country level, that would be the equivalent to putting £800 every year back in everyone's pocket. It could be transformative in terms of physical and mental well-being, and if the food's produced locally in an organic and regenerative way, that would be transformative. There's a lovely project called School Zero, asking how do we teach children to develop an unshakable confidence in their ability to solve real-world challenges? How do we get them to expect there to be zero damage to nature, zero products to landfill, and zero carbon as a consequence of their school, by connecting the work they do every day in school to real-world challenges in the community around them? One of my favourite projects, and one that I've been loosely involved with, is based in Cardiff in the Vale of Glamorgan, called Big Box Boyd. It means big food box. And Big Box Boyd is taking converted shipping containers, refitting them as stores where surplus food from supermarkets gets shared for free or paid for on a pay-as-you-feel basis with parents and citizens in the local community. And the children get taught food literacies about where food comes from, what it does to them, what it does to nature, and what the opportunities are by thinking about it differently. And we're finding already that children are changing the parents' behaviour about the future of food and what they can do with it. And we imagine, what could a whole country of children who become food literate do to the economy and do to the well-being of that nation? And I can imagine also the role of kids in changing the opinions of business leaders. So Ella's Kitchen, one of the UK B Corps that we're proud to stand alongside, Ella's Kitchen showed this research showing that 67% of business leaders with children had changed their sustainability policy at work as a consequence of conversations they'd had at home around the dining table. And that's before the kids had been trained. Imagine what might happen if all of those children had been trained on the difference that they can make by making better decisions. So huge opportunities around there. And lastly, Cardiff Council, our capital city in Wales. Cardiff Council are on a mission to get rid of the idea of COVID and beyond being a deficit language. This is the time you missed out, you'll never catch up. And are working a way of saying, how can we take 34,000 children on a journey that makes 2021 the start of the best time of their lives, not the pits of the worst time. So I find that as we sit in Wales Transition Lab with soft power, with no authority other than our confidence and our knowledge, we have no designated authority, we have no money. But sitting with soft power is what allows us to bring organisations together in a non-threatening way to imagine futures that do not exist at the minute but could be built by those organisations working radically and differently together. I'm certain that there's magic to be found in the process of going through that area of kind of being alert, being bold and being curious and setting goals that make your stomach tingle. These are goals that don't just sit in your head, but they're ones that you feel in your whole body. And when you set goals that are so big, like saying, could we not get every child in our country to be food literate? Could we not imagine taking a quarter of our food and relocalising it so it benefits nature and us? Could we not maximise the benefit of prevention in health by getting people out into nature, spending time in it, slowing down, improving the heart rate, improving their breathing? When you set goals that are so amazing, it brings a magic to them and it brings a creativity, the likes of which we've never seen before. So I invite you to spend time with colleagues in that scary space of unknowing, where you ask yourselves, if we couldn't fail and took into account all of the information that we know that's happening in the world around us, what is it we would set out to do in the things that we care most about? Come with me, stand right on the edge. And instead of being scared about what's off the cliff, let's look to the deep water that lies on the other side of it and together take a massive leap into the space of what's possible in front of us. Diolch yn fawr.